Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on a pretty crucial mission. We want to tear through the first 2 centuries of Imperial Rome.
Yeah, this isn't just going to be a straight timeline.
No, exactly. We're really dissecting the blueprint of absolute power, how the Republic died, but elegantly, disguised.
And looking at the people, the culture, the crises, everything that shaped that foundational era.
Right. From Augustus, the man who started it all, right up to Commodus, and that, Tsar implosion.
So we're covering roughly 27 BC to 192 AD. That's the Julio-Claudians, the family drama.
Oh, yeah.
Then the Flavians, who kind of stabilized things.
Yeah.
And then that so-called Golden Age, the Antonines, which, as we'll see, was maybe more fragile than...
And the sources we're pulling from, it's a massive stack. Biographies, military accounts, archaeological stuff like Pompeii.
Economic data, too, which really shows the hidden costs of empire. Stuff our modern understanding is built.
So the big question, maybe the biggest question for Rome, how did this state, a republic built on hating kings, totally flip to one-man rule?
And how did they keep that system, which seems incredibly volatile, running for 2 whole centuries?
Yeah.
What are the tricks, the realities on the ground?
It's fascinating.
And, the simple starting point is just acknowledging that single rule did become the norm.
Right.
The historian Suetonius basically cemented that realization. Around 121 AD, he published his De Vita Caesarum on the lives of the Caesars.
The fact he could even write that.
Exactly. 12 biographies, one after the other. All powerful rulers. It confirms it. The Republic was gone, replaced by this tradition of monarchy, just wearing a clever disguise.
Okay, let's dive into that disguise. That's where it all is. So, Octavian beats Mark Antony, 30 BC. He's got the military muscle, but politically, he's walking a tightrope.
Huge problem. Yeah. The Roman elite, the Senate especially, they could stomach a temporary dictator in a crisis, but a king, never. That was deeply offensive to their identity.
So what was the trick? How did he go from warlord to basically permanent ruler without calling himself king?
It was honestly pure political genius, a masterclass in marketing. His main goal in 27 BC was absolute control, but he had to make it look constitutional, provisional.
He had to sell it as restoring the republic, not tilling it.
Precisely. And the key mechanism was this princeps.
The first citizen.
Right. Princeps just means first among us, first senator, first citizen. It sounded harmless, traditional even.
But it wasn't about creating a new office, was it? It was about collecting existing powers.
That's the crucial part. He didn't invent anything new. He just systematically absorbed all the important Republican powers into his own hand, monopolized them.
So, what specifically are we talking about?
Okay, 2 main pillars of power. First, Imperium Maius. That's superior military command. It meant he outranked every governor, every general, everywhere. No military rival could legally challenge him.
Got it. Total military control.
Second, Tribunicia Potesta, the power of the tribune of the plebe. This was huge. It made him personally sacrosanct, couldn't be harmed or prosecuted. And crucially, it gave him the power to veto any act by any magistrate or the Senate.
So he could stop anything he didn't like.
Anything. Combine supreme military command with this ultimate veto power, hold them year after year, and suddenly all the other consuls, tribunes, senators, they're functionally irrelevant.
It looks like the Republic is still running on paper.
But in reality, one man holds all the levers, and nobody can legally touch him.
And then he adds the fancy titles.
Right, the honorifics. Augustus the Venerable One, an imperator commander, which of course is where we get emperor. But honestly, more important than the legal stuff, the potestas, was the moral authority he built, auctoritas.
How did he do that?
By positioning himself as the restorer of peace, piety. Pietas, tradition. The dutiful son avenging his adopted father, Caesar, the man who ended a century of horrific civil war. That image, that moral weight, was arguably more powerful than any law. It was the glue holding it all together.
And Rome desperately needed that glue. What kind of state did he actually inherit after
Chaos, total chaos. Rome had conquered the Mediterranean, but it was constantly at war with itself. The economy was a wreck, provinces were looted, society was fractured, and he had these huge private armies loyal only to their generals like Antony's, like his own. That was the biggest threat.
So job number 1 was stability. Getting those armies under control must have been terrifying.
Absolutely, the highest priority, and incredibly risky. He had to demobilize hundreds of thousands of soldiers. These are battle-hardened men who only know war.
How did he do it without them turning on?
The compensation package was key. He didn't just send them home broke. He gave them generous pensions, a massive lump sum, like 12,000 denarii, a fortune for an ordinary soldier, or land grant, often in newly pacified provinces like Gaul or Spain.
Turning potential rebels into loyal landowners.
Exactly. It bought their loyalty to the system, to him as the provider, not just to their immediate commander. And it helped settle and Romanize the provinces. It was incredibly expensive, yes, but it bought peace, internal peace.
And to prevent future military coups based.
That's where the Praetorian Guard comes in. On paper, his personal bodyguard. But Critically, they were the only significant military force allowed within Rome or Italy itself.
Centralizing security makes sense.
It did, but oh, the irony. By putting this elite armed force right next to the seat of power, he inadvertently created the very tool that would later make and break emperors, the ultimate political volatility right there in the capital.
Okay, so the military settled. But then there's Rome itself, a city of maybe 1 million. How do you keep that monster fed and quiet?
You expand the Curanone, the grain dole, massively. This wasn't just welfare. It was sophisticated political control, guaranteeing free or heavily subsidized grain for the huge urban poor population. Well, it neutralized one of the main sources of riots and unrest.
Ah, so that's the origin of bread and circus.
That's the bread part, absolutely. Juvenal's famous critique, much later, that the Roman people traded their political freedom for food and entertainment. Augustus understood that bargain implicitly. Keep their bellies full, keep them entertained, and they'll accept your rule.
So stability was the watchword, but he didn't stop expanding the empire entirely, did he?
Not initially. There was some consolidation, finishing the conquest of northern Spain, for example, some exploration, too. Expeditions went into the Arabian Peninsula. They ended up making the Nabateans a client kingdom, controlling trade routes.
And down into Africa.
Yeah, they pushed into the Sahara, maybe as far as modern Mali. But the reports came back saying, basically, there's nothing out there but sand and heat. It suggested, maybe endless conquest wasn't the most practical goal.
So the focus shifted north to Germania.
Right. Following Caesar's lead, the idea was to push the border to the River Elbe, a more defensible natural frontier than the Rhine.
And that did not...
Catastrophe. Utter catastrophe. 9 AD, the Teutoburg Forest. 3 entire legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, ambushed and completely wiped out by Germanic tribes led by Arminius, a Roman-trained auxiliary officer.
Oh, 3 legions. That's devastating.
It was more than a military defeat. It was a deep psychological blow. Suetonius tells us Augustus was shattered. He'd wander the palace, banging his head on the doors, yelling, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions."
And that defeat fundamentally changed Roman strategy.
Absolutely. It was the hard limit. Augustus pulled back to the Rhine, and crucially, he advised his successors, consolidate. Don't overreach. Use the Rhine, the Danube River, the Sahara Desert. Use these natural barriers as your defensible frontiers. Stick to what you have.
So Germania was effectively written off.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
That advice held, more or less, for centuries. Rome accepted that northern wilderness was just too difficult, too costly to hold.
But while the military expansion stopped, the building boom was immense. The famous boast about marble
Found Rome a city of brick and left it one of marble. And wasn't just talk. He transformed the city physically. The centerpiece was his own Forum of Augustus.
with the Temple of Mars altar.
Mars the Avenger, yes. A direct link to his victory over Caesar's assassins and inside the Forum, cleverly, he put over 100 statues of old Republican hero Fabius Max Scipio Africanus.
But his statue was prominent among them.
Oh, very prominent. Positioning himself not as breaking from tradition, but as the culmination, the ultimate Roman hero. It was brilliant propaganda cast.
And this era, of course, is the golden age of Latin literature, all supported by the regime.
Absolutely. We owe so much to the patronage system, guided by figures like Maecenas, Augustus's friend and cultural advisor. Virgil writes the Aeneid, turning a myth into the national epic, linking Rome to Troy and the heroic Prince Aeneas. Ovid, with his Metamorphoses, a huge collection of myths. Livy writing the history of Rome from its mythical fount. These weren't just writers. They were participants in the Augustan project, legitimizing the new order through timeless art and history. Their association with the court.
Okay, so Augustus builds this impressive disguised monarch designed to last. But the one thing it lacked was a clear legal way to pass on power.
The succession problem. It haunted the whole system. And because Augustus lived so incredibly long, he outlived all his preferred heirs.
He had no biological...
Right. Only his daughter Julia, who he ended up exiling for adultery scandal. His chosen successor, his right-hand man, Marcus Agrippa, died young. His grandsons, Gaius and Lucius, also died. It was tragic.
Tiberius.
His stepson, Livia's son from her previous... Tiberius was a brilliant general, very capable. But he was also gloomy, awkward, maybe even resentful. He wasn't the charismatic heir Augustus wanted, but he was the only viable option left.
And Tiberius's reign, starting in 14 AD, immediately highlights this massive problem we have as historians.
The sources are incredibly biased.
Hugely biased. We rely so heavily on Tacitus and Suetonius. Both were senators, or from the senatorial class. And they wrote with a deep-seated resentment towards emperors who didn't, in their view, show the Senate proper respect.
And Tiberius definitely rubbed them the wrong way.
Oh, absolutely. Suetonius especially. Just savage. Paints him as aloof, cruel, indecisive, and then retreating to the island of Capri to indulge in, well, lurid sexual depravity. It's part history, part gossip.
So if we try to filter out the senatorial slander, what was Tiberius really like as a ruler?
The evidence suggests he was actually a pretty competent administrator, at least initially. Fiscally responsible, generally maintained peace. His real crime in the eyes of the Senate was that he hated the political game in Rome. He despised the flattery, the the backstabbing.
So he just left.
For the last decade of his reign, yeah. He withdrew to Capri and tried to rule from it, which was a terrible mistake. It created a power vacuum.
Filled by his Praetorian prefect, Sejanus. Tiberius delegated enormous power. Sejanus basically ran the empire day to day from Rome. And predictably, he got ambitious.
He made a play for the throne himself.
It seems so. He started purging potential rivals. When Tiberius finally realized the danger, probably tipped off by his sister-in-law Antonia, the crackdown was swift and brutal.
Sejanus' execution in 31 quite worried.
Oh, it's dramatic. Denounced in the Senate, dragged off, executed, his body torn apart by the mob. His family, even his young children, were killed too. It showed the dark side of this news. Power was absolute, and purges could happen terrifyingly fast, based on the emperor's fear or suspicion. Not exactly the rule of law.
This instability just explodes with the next emperor, Caligula, who takes over in 37 AD. Where did he get that nick? Little Boot.
He was the son of Germanicus, who was Tiberius's nephew and a wildly popular general. Caligula grew up in his father's army camps on the Rhine frontier. The soldiers adored the little kid marching around in a miniature uniform, including the caligae, the hobnailed military boots. So they called him Caligula Little.
He started out popular.
Immensely popular. People were thrilled to be rid of the gloomy Tiberius. But according to all our sources, the power went straight to his head, and he descended rapidly into tyranny.
Okay, again, acknowledging the source bias. What are the key examples of his supposed...
Well, the list is long, wasting the treasury on insane building projects, demanding to be worshipped as a living god, which deeply offended Roman tradition, publicly humiliating senators, forcing them to run alongside his chariot.
And the attempt to put a statue of himself in the temple.
Yes, a massive provocation that almost led to war in Judea. It showed a complete disregard for the religious sensitivities of his subject. And then there's the most famous.
The horse had it.
The claim that he planned to make his favorite horse, Incitatus, a consul. Now, whether he actually intended to do it or was just saying it to mock the Senate, who knows? But the story stuck because it perfectly captured the perception that he held all traditional offices and honors in utter contempt.
And his reign didn't last long.
Barely 4 years. The Praetorian Guard, the very force meant to protect the emperor, had had enough of his erratic behavior and cruelty. They assassinated him in 41 AD.
Which confirms their new role as kingmakers, or emperor killers.
Absolutely. The Guard was now arguably the most powerful institution in Rome. If they decided an emperor had to go, he went.
The assassination itself has this almost comical scene. They find Claudius, Caligula's uncle, hiding behind a curtain.
Yeah, apparently terrified for his life. Claudius had always been seen as the family joke. He had physical infirmities, a limp, a stammer, and the family had mostly kept him out of public life, thinking him unfit.
So the Praetorians find him and make him emperor.
Exactly. They probably thought he'd be easy to control.
Yeah.
A pup. But Claudius turned out to be, well, surprisingly effective. Arguably the best of the Julio-Claudians after Augustus himself.
What made him successful?
He was actually quite intelligent, a scholar even. He took administration seriously. He relied heavily on capable advisors, often talented freedmen, former slaves, which infuriated the old Roman aristocracy, but improved the efficiency of the bureaucracy.
And he made a huge strategic decision, ignoring Augustus's advice.
He did. He launched the invasion of Britain in 43 AD.
Why? Augustus had warned against overexpansion.
Claudius needed military prestige. He hadn't earned power through conquest like Augustus or Tiberius. Britain seemed like a relatively achievable prize, wealthy in minerals, politically divided Celtic tribes.
It wasn't exactly a walkover, though.
No, it was a long, hard slog. Decades of fighting against tribes like the Iceni, famous for Boudicca's rebellion later under Nero. Tacitus wrote a whole book, the Agricola, about his father-in-law's campaigns pushing north. They eventually subdued most of modern England and Wales, but never fully conquered Caledonia, Scotland.
Okay, which brings us to the last of the Julio-Claudians. Nero. He comes to power in 54 AD, and Claudius's death.
Very suspicious. The story is that his ambitious wife, Agrippina the Younger, who was also, and Nero's mother poisoned him, probably with mushrooms, to ensure her young son Nero got the throne before Claudius's own son Britannicus came of age. Classic Roman imperial intrigue.
Nero's legacy is toxic, mostly remembered for the Great Fire of Rome.
The fire in 64 AD is the defining event. It destroyed huge swaths of the city, and the rumor immediately spread that Nero had started it deliberately.
Why?
To clear land for his ambitious new palace complex, the Domus Aurea, the Golden Hour. It was going to be obscenely vast and luxurious. Whether he actually started the fire is debatable. Fires were common in ancient Rome, but he certainly benefited from it.
And he needed to escape.
Precisely. To deflect the blame, he pointed the finger at a small, relatively unknown religious sect, the Christians. He launched the first major persecution, executing them in horrific ways in the arena. This cemented his image as the ultimate villain for later Christian writers, like the Antichrist.
But you mentioned earlier there's a counter-narrative. If he was so hated, why did people pretend to be him after he died?
That's the fascinating question. Several false Neros popped up in the East, claiming to be him and rallying support. It suggests he might have been genuinely popular, at least with the common people in the army, particularly in the Greek-speaking East, where he toured and performed.
He fancied himself an artist, right? Musician, actor.
Yes, which the Roman elite found deeply undignified for an emperor. But the masses might have loved the spectacle. Our main sources, Tacitus and Suetonius, are centered. They despised his populism, his lack of deference to them, his artistic pretensions. They had every reason to paint him in the worst possible light. So the image we have is likely heavily manufactured.
Regardless of his character, his reign did see a continuation of that literary goal.
Absolutely. His tutor and advisor, for a time, was the great Stoic philosopher Seneca. Seneca wrote brilliant essays and tragedies that are still read today.
We also get Lucan, Petronius.
Lucan's epic poem, the Pharsalia, about the civil war between Caesar and Pompey, and Petronius. His Satyricon is amazing, one of the very few surviving Roman novels. It's a witty, satirical, often scandalous glimpse into Roman society, probably reflecting the Neronian court itself. And Pliny the Elder compiled his massive natural history, so culturally it was still vibrant.
But it all fell apart. Why?
A combination effect. The massive expense of rebuilding Rome after the fire, the suppression of conspiracies like the Pisonian plot in 65 AD, which led to purges, including Seneca being forced to commit suicide. But the biggest drain was probably the first Jewish revolt, which broke out in Judea in 66 AD.
A huge military undertaking.
Enormous. It tied down legions and resources for years. This financial strain and military distraction created an opportunity. Provincial governors, seeing weakness, started to rebel in 68 AD Vindex in Galba in Spain.
And Nero lost control.
Completely. The Senate finally found its courage and declared him a public enemy. The Praetorian Guard abandoned him. He fled Rome and, facing capture, committed suicide. His last words, supposedly, "What an artist dies in me."
The end of the dynasty. And Rome plunged back into chaos. So Nero's death in 68 AD blows the lid off everything. The secret Augustus tried so hard
that the emperor's power ultimately came from the army, not the Senate or the law.
Was now out in the open, leading to the year of the Forum.
Yes, 69 AD. Just chaos. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, one after another, raised up and then murdered by competing legions or the Praetorian Guard. It proved that military force was the only thing that mattered in choosing an emperor now.
Until someone strong enough emerged to end the fighting.
And that someone was Vespasian, Titus Flavius Vespasianus, a tough, experienced general. He'd been the one commanding the legions suppressing the Jewish revolt.
So he had loyal troops.
Exactly. His legions in the east declared him emperor. He marched on Rome, defeated Vitellius' forces, and restored order. He founded a new dynasty, the Flavians.
Vespasian seems like a total contrast to the Julio-Claudian. No aristocratic background, just a pragmatic military man.
Very much so. He came from an equestrian family, not the old nobility. He was known for his common sense, his discipline, and apparently a rather earthy sense of humor. His main job was to fix the mess Nero and the Civil War had left behind, especially the treasure.
Which brings us to the urine tax.
Yes, the famous urine tax. It sounds bizarre to us.
It really does.
But it makes perfect sense in context. Urine contains ammonia. In the ancient world, ammonia was essential for lots of industrial processes, cleaning wool, tanning leather, laundering clothes. Fullers collected urine from public latrines.
So Vespasian just hacked.
He taxed the collection and sale of it, turning waste into revenue. Classic Vespasian practicality. There's that story where his son Titus complained it was undignified. Vespasian supposedly held up a coin earned from the tax and asked Titus, "Pecuni non olet, does the money stink?"
Brilliant. Pure pragmatism.
That was him. Restore finances, restore discipline. And he started a massive public building project to kind of heal the city after Nero.
The Colosseum.
Well, the Flavian Amphitheater, as it was originally known, built on the site of the artificial lake of Nero's Golden House, symbolically giving that land back to the people of Rome for public entertainment. A stroke of political genius.
His son Titus actually opened it, right? Vespasian died before it was finished.
Correct. Titus became emperor in 79 AD. He was apparently very popular, the darling of mankind, but his reign was tragically short, only 2 years.
But his brief reign included 2 major events. The opening of the Colosseum.
In 80 AD, huge game, spectacle, a massive structure, holding maybe 60,000 to 80,000 people, an engineering marvel.
And the other event, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius.
August, or possibly October, 79 AD, the eruption that buried Pompeii and Herculaneum, a horrific natural disaster, obviously. But for us, archaeologically, it's an unparalleled gift.
A time capsule.
Exactly. An entire Roman city, multiple towns actually, frozen in time under layers of ash and pumice. We're still excavating them almost 300 years later. It gives us this incredibly detailed snapshot of everyday Roman life during this exact period, the early empire.
So what does Pompeii tell us? What was life like under the Pax Romana?
Well, first, it confirms how urbanized Italy was. Maybe 25-30% of the population lived in cities and towns. That's remarkably high for the pre-industrial world.
And the social divisions are starkly visible?
Oh, yeah. You see these luxurious villas owned by the wealthy elite, often with beautiful frescoes, mosaics, private baths, right next door to cramped, multi-story apartment blocks, the insulae where the poor live, and slavery was everywhere. Maybe 10-25% of the population was enslaved. They did everything: domestic service, crafts, agriculture, public work. Mind-blowing, really. The aqueducts bringing fresh water for miles, purely by gravity, feeding public fountains, baths, even some private homes, the sophisticated road network, the public baths themselves with their complex heating systems, the hypocausts.
Underfloor heating, basically.
Yeah, hot air from a furnace circulated under the floors and through wall cavities to heat the rooms and the water. Gee. And Pompeii shows us things like thermopolia.
Ancient fast food joint.
Pretty much. Little shops opening onto the street with counters holding large pottery jars, often heated from below, serving hot food and drink. It shows a bustling commercial urban life.
And all this depends on the peace enforced by Rome. What were the legions doing during these long periods without major wars of expansion?
They became the empire's all-purpose civil service, really. Stationed out in the provinces, they weren't just soldiers. They were engineers, building roads, bridges, aqueducts. They were surveyors, laying out new settlements. They acted as police, firefighter. The Pax Romana was maintained in large part by this massive, expensive, but highly effective military presence doing constructive work.
Okay, let's talk about religion in a place like, what did they believe? Just Jupiter, Mars, the usual suspects.
The main Roman gods were definitely central. Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, Juno, Minerva, the Capitoline Triad. Mars was especially important to Rome, much more than Ares was to the Greek. But Pompeii shows incredible religious diversity, too. It was a cosmopolitan port town.
So foreign gods.
Very much so. There's a large temple of Apollo, reflecting the city's Greek origin, and really surprisingly, a beautifully preserved temple of Isis.
The Egyptian goddess?
Yes. Isis, goddess of magic, fertility, the afterlife. Her cult was incredibly popular across the Mediterranean. Finding her temple, and others like it, shows that Roman religion wasn't rigid or exclusive. People incorporated foreign deities easily.
Alongside the state gods and the emperor cult.
Right. The imperial cult, worshipping the emperor, living or dead, as divine, was a mandatory part of public life, a test of loyalty. But people also had their private domestic religion, little shrines in homes, the Lorarium, dedicated to the Lares and Penaetes, the household protector spirits. It was a mix of public duty and personal piety.
So Titus dies young in 81 AD. Who takes over?
His younger brother, Domitian, the last of the Flavians.
And his reputation is not great.
Mixed initially. He seems to have been a competent, if stern, administrator. He secured the frontiers, fought wars against the Dacians up in modern Romania. But like some emperors before him, he grew increasingly autocratic, paranoid, and demanded excessive honors. He really clashed with the Senate.
Following that familiar pattern.
Exact. Aloofness. Demanding titles like Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. Executing senators, he suspected. It alienated the traditional elite. And predictably,
he was assassinated
in 96 AD. A palace conspiracy involving court officials, possibly his own wife, the Senate, and yes, the Praetorian Guard again. But this time, the Senate acted quickly. They had a candidate ready. They nominated an elderly, respected senator named Nerva.
And that marks the beginning of a new, more stable era.
Yes, the period often called the Age of the Five Good Emperors.
Okay, so the assassination of Domitian leads to the Senate choosing Nerva. And this kicks off the era of the Five Good Emperors, roughly 96 AD to 180. What defined this period?
The key change was the method of succession. Instead of relying on potentially disastrous biological inheritance, like with Nero or Domitian, these emperors generally chose their successor based on perceived merit, adopting the best available man as their son and heir.
Not exactly democracy, but better than leaving it to chance or birth.
Much better. It gave Rome an extraordinary run of capable, dedicated rulers for nearly a century, starting with Nerva, who quickly adopted the powerful General Trajan.
Trajan, emperor from 98 AD, he becomes gold standard, right?
Literally. For centuries afterwards, the Senate would hail a new emperor with the prayer, Felicior Augusto, Melior Traiano, be more fortunate than Augustus and better than Trajan. That's how high his reputation stood.
Why? What did he achieve?
Primarily military glory. He was the last great Roman conqueror. He pushed the empire to its absolute maximum extent. Remember Augustus' advice to consolidate. Trajan ignored it.
Where did he conquer?
His biggest achievement was the conquest of Dacia, which is modern Romania. A tough war, commemorated on that incredible spiraling column, still standing in Rome today. It brought vast amounts of gold and slaves into the empire.
And he pushed east, too.
Yes. He annexed the Nabatean kingdom, modern Jordan, securing control of lucrative trade routes.
Yeah.
And then he launched a major campaign against Parthia, Rome's eastern rival. He actually conquered Armenia and Mesopotamia, reaching the Persian Gulf.
Wow, so Roman legions on the Persian Gulf.
For a brief moment, yes. It was the high water mark of Roman expansion. But those eastern conquests proved impossible to hold. They were too far away, too culturally alien, too expensive to garrison.
So his successor pulled back.
Immediately. Trajan died on campaign in 117 AD. His adopted successor, Hadrian, took one look at the situation and abandoned Mesopotamia and Armenia. Hadrian was the great consolidator.
A complete reversal of Trajan's policy.
Total reversal. Hadrian realized the empire was dangerously overstretched. His focus was on strengthening the existing borders, not pushing them further out. He spent a huge portion of his reign traveling, inspecting the provinces, reforming administration, building defenses.
Like Hadrian's Wall.
Exactly. That massive wall across northern Britain, over 70 miles long, wasn't just a barrier, it was a statement. The limit of the Roman world is here. No more adventures in Caledonia. Define the frontier, defend it efficiently. That was Hadrian's philosophy.
He was more than just a military strategist, though.
Oh, yeah. He was highly cultured, a great admirer of Greek civilization, a Phil-Hellene. He reformed Roman law, making it more systematic. But his actions also had negative consequences.
Like in Judea.
Yes. His decision to build a new Roman colony, Aelia Capitolina, on the ruins of Jerusalem, complete with a temple to Jupiter on the Temple Mount, that provoked the massive and brutally suppressed Bar Kokhba revolt, the Third Jewish War. It led to immense bloodshed and finalized the dispersal of the Jewish people from Judea, the diaspora.
So a complex legacy. After Hadrian comes Antoninus.
Adopted by Hadrian, Antoninus Pius ruled from 138 to 161 AD, and his reign is remarkably uneventful.
Uneventful in a good way.
The best way. 23 years of almost unbroken peace and stability. He was a careful administrator, stayed in Italy mostly, managed the finances well, improved infrastructure like the water supply. He left the empire prosperous and the treasury full.
This must be the period Edward Gibbon was talking about.
Precisely. It's Antoninus Pius's reign, along with the preceding ones of Nerva, Trajan, and Hadrian, that led the 18th century historian Edward Gibbon to make his famous statement.
Remind us what that was.
He said, "If a man were called to fix the periods in the history of the world during which the condition of the human race was most happy and prosperous, he would without hesitation name that which elapsed from the death of Domitian to the accession of Commodus." Basically this era, 96 to 180 AD.
The happiest time in human history, according to Gibbon. High praise.
Extremely high praise. And from the perspective of peace and stable governance for the elite, maybe he had a point.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
There's always a but. Because right at the end of this supposed golden age, under the next emperor, the philosopher king Marcus Aurelius, massive cracks start to appear. Cracks that were probably there all along.
Marcus Aurelius rules from 161 to 188, famous for his philosophical writings, the Meditation.
Yes, written privately, probably in his tent while on campaign. Stoic reflections on duty, resilient, the nature of the universe, deeply moving. He co-ruled initially with Lucius Verus, who died fairly early on, likely from plague.
It's ironic, the philosopher king presiding over the start of major crisis.
Deeply ironic, because while he was writing about inner peace, the empire faced two simultaneous devastating shocks that really shattered the Pax Romana.
Before we get to those shocks, was there an underlying economic weakness already developing?
Absolutely. We need to talk about the money itself, the silver coin, the denarius. Even back under Trajan, to pay for his wars and building projects, the emperors started quietly reducing the amount of actual silver in the coin, mixing in cheaper metal. Debasement.
So inflation.
Exactly. Each coin was worth less intrinsic. By Marcus Aurelius' time, the silver purity had dropped significantly, maybe down to 75% or less. This meant the state needed more coins to pay the soldiers, buy supplies. It fueled long-term inflation and they were essentially funding the Golden Age by devaluing their own currency.
Okay, so that's a structural weakness. Then come the external shock. First, the Antonine
catastrophe. It arrived around 165 AD, probably brought back by soldiers returning from a campaign against Parthia. We think it was likely smallpox or maybe meat. Roman society had no immunity.
How bad was it?
Estimates vary, but the mortality rate might have been 10%, 15%, maybe even higher. And we're talking potentially 5 to 10 million dead across the empire in the initial waves that lasted until about 180. It just kept.
The demographic impact must have been enormous.
Devastating. Fewer people means fewer taxpayers, fewer farmers, fewer craftsmen, and crucially, fewer potential recruits for the army.
Which leads directly to the second.
The Marcomannic War. While the plague was raging, the northern frontier, which had been relatively quiet for decades, suddenly erupted.
Where?
Along the Danube River, a huge coalition of Germanic tribes, the Marmani, the Quadi, Sarmatian tribes too, broke through the border defense. This wasn't just a raid. They pushed deep into Roman territory, even threatening northern Italy itself.
The heartland of the empire threatened. That hadn't happened in centuries.
Not like this. It forced Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher, to spend basically the last 15 years of his life on the battlefield, desperately trying to push these tribes back across the Danube.
And the plague made fighting these wars even harder.
Immensely hard. Manpower was critically short because of the plague death. Marcus Aurelius had to resort to desperate measures, recruiting slaves, gladiators, even bandits into the legions. Things you'd never do unless you were utterly desperate. It showed the system was breaking down.
So the northern frontier wasn't secure anymore.
It became a contested, bleeding border. The wars were incredibly costly in terms of money and lives, and they foreshadowed the much larger crises of the 3rd century. The illusion of impenetrable Roman power was shattered.
And after all this struggle, Marcus Aurelius makes a fateful decision about his successor.
He does. Instead of adopting a proven general or administrator like his predecessors had done, he lets his own biological son, Commodus, succeed him.
Breaking the pattern of the good emperor.
Exactly. Commodus takes power in 180 AD, and he's the complete opposite of his father.
Back to the bad old ways.
Commodus fits right into that bad emperor mold, like Caligula or Nero. He had no interest in governing, delegated power to corrupt favorites and Praetorian prefects, demanded worship as a living god, specifically as the reincarnation of Hercules, and drained the treasury on lavish spectacles.
And his behavior got weird, even by Roman emperor standards.
Extremely weird. His obsession with Hercules led him to start performing publicly as a gladiator in the Colosseum.
The emperor fighting as a gladiator?
Yes, usually against terrified, poorly armed opponents or just slaughtering exotic animals. It horrified the elite, but maybe some of the mob enjoyed it. He also decided Rome should be renamed Colonia Commodiana and tried to rename all 12 months of the year after his own various titles. Megalomania off the chart. A major fire also swept Rome in 191 AD under his watch.
How did it end for him?
Predictable. Another conspiracy. His mistress, his chamberlain, the Praetorian prefect, they realized he was completely out of control and planning more purges. On New Year's Eve, 192 AD, they had him strangled in his bath by a wrestler named Narcissus.
A rather ignominious.
And the end of the Antonine Dynasty, and the end of that supposed golden age. His death immediately triggered another vicious civil war, the Year of the Five Emperors, and ushered in a period of intense military dictatorship and the beginning of what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century.
So we've covered these first 2 dramatic centuries, but it's crucial we remember how we know all this. Everything from Augustus's disguise to Commodus's wrestling, it comes through the filter of writers.
Absolutely, and acknowledging their biases is key to understanding the history. We've mentioned Tacitus and Suetonius a lot.
Yeah.
Their influence is massive, especially for the Julio-Claudians.
And their bias is primarily senatorial.
Yes. Tacitus was a senator, a brilliant historian, but fundamentally a Republican idealist who saw the Principate, the empire, as inherently corrupt. He praised emperors who seemed to respect the Senate, like Trajan, and viciously attacked those who didn't, Tiberius, Nero, Domitian. His analysis is sharp, but his framing is consistently hostile to emperors who asserted absolute power too openly.
So when Tacitus describes an emperor's paranoia or cruelty, we're often seeing a reflection of the Senate's fear and resentment.
Very likely, yes. Suetonius is different. He wasn't a senator, more of an imperial administrator and scholar, but he wrote for that elite audience. His Lives of the Caesars is less political analysis, more biography focused on character, anecdotes, portents, and especially scandal.
The juicy details.
Exact. The sexual habits, the eccentricities, the cruelty. It makes for great reading, but it reinforces that narrative of good versus mad emperors, often based on how much they flattered or ignored the senatorial class. We have to take his stories with a grain of salt, even though they're incredibly valuable for the details they preserve.
But the writing wasn't all history and biography. There was sharp social too.
Oh, yes. Especially under the Flavians and into the 2nd century, this was the great age of Roman satire. Poets like Martial and Juvenal wrote scathing verses about the realities of life in Rome. Corruption, the social climbing, the noise, the poverty, sheer absurdity of it all.
Juvenal gave us bread and circuses.
He did. His famous line captures that cynical view that the Roman people had become passive, easily bought off with free food and gladiatorial game, no longer caring about real political participation. It's a powerful critique of the imperial system's effect on civic virtue.
And other literary forms continue. Epic poetry.
Definitely. Silius Italicus wrote the Punica, this enormous epic poem about the Second Punic War against Hannibal. It's the longest surviving epic from Latin antiquity. It shows that traditional forms and historical subjects remained important, and rhetoric was huge. Quintilian was the master teacher of effective speaking and writing.
And you mentioned the Greek ist having its own cultural boom.
Yes, the Second Sophistic, a revival of Greek rhetoric, literature, and philosophy under the stability of the Roman Empire. This period produced some incredibly important writers for us.
Like Plutarch.
Plutarch is essential. A Greek writing in the Roman period. His parallel lives are masterpieces. He pairs biographies of famous Greeks like Alexander the Great or Pericles with famous Romans Caesar or Cicero, comparing their virtues and vice. He preserves so much information about Greek history that would otherwise be lost and gives us deep insight into Roman character ideals too.
And there were even travel guides.
Pausanias. He wrote a detailed description of Greece. It's basically an ancient travel guide, meticulously describing temples, statues, myths, and local customs region by region.
Sure.
For archaeologists trying to reconstruct lost sites in Greece, Pausanias is often the indispensable starting.
And someone wrote science fiction.
Sort of. Lucian of Samosata. He was a Syrian Greek writer, a brilliant satirist. His work, A True Story, is this fantastical parody of travel tales. It includes a voyage to the moon, meeting moon people, interplanetary warfare, even a trip inside a giant whale. It's hilarious and wildly imaginative.
Not quite Star Trek, but
arguably the ancestor of science fiction. It certainly influenced later writers like Thomas More and Rabelais with its satirical, fantastical journey narrative. It shows the incredible creativity still flourishing across the empire. #tag outro.
Okay, let's try to wrap this up. 200 years, what does it all boil down to? It seems like an incredible act of political stagecraft by Augustus, creating a system that papered over absolute rule,
followed by periods of intense, almost soap opera-like family drama under the Julio-Claudians, then stabilization, incredible engineering, massive cultural output.
and then this supposed golden age under the Antonines, which Gibbon called the happiest time.
Yeah, that paradox is the really fascinating part, because as we saw, even during that peak prosperity under Antoninus Pius and Marcus Aurelius, the cracks were already undeniable.
The Praetorian Guard always lurking, ready to intervene.
The dodgy finances, debasing the currency bit by bit.
The devastating Antonine Plague, killing millions and weakening the empire from within.
And then the borders starting to crumble under the pressure of the Marcomannic War, all happening during the supposed peak.
So the empire reached its highest point, but maybe it was already fundamentally weakened, already starting its decline.
It really makes you question the whole idea of a sudden fall, which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
If all the signs of crisis, economic strain, plague, military pressure, political instability simmering just below the surface were already present and growing during Rome's absolute zenith under Marcus Aurelius, does that mean the chaos of the 3rd century wasn't really a sudden collapse?
Was it just the inevitable result of the built-in flaws finally being exposed by pressures that were bound to come?
Or did Commodus, by being such a disastrously bad emperor right at that critical moment, actually accelerate a collapse that might have been managed or delayed otherwise? Was it fate baked into this system? Or was it bad leadership tipping a fragile structure over the edge?
Structure versus agency, destiny versus incompetence, something to think about.